Hello, and welcome to the Energy and Consciousness Summit. I'm Sheila Derfler, your host, and we have a wonderful speaker for you today, Elisha Halpin. And Elisha is a mentor, teacher, and spiritual director. And she has so much to share with us today. So welcome, Elisha. I'm so glad you're here. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself and just a little of your background and how you're working with energy and consciousness?
Sure, all right, just that. So my background is in dance. Excuse me. I am a choreographer and performer by trade and also by profession. So I've taught at the university for about 20 years, working with performers and training embodiment around that. And through my own journey of dance and working in somatics, I really fell into energy work. And through that, began to sort of get curious, went on a whole autoimmune healing journey, opened myself up to an awakening experience a little over a decade ago. And from there, just began to really understand I had always been working with energy, and then just really willing to step into mastery around that, and kind of have ended up here. And so I work with intuition, energy, and embodiment. And specifically in modalities, I work with intuitive intelligence and neurosculpting and breathwork as sort of the modality base for that. But what I'm really interested in doing is evolving our consciousness through the body, really working with divine feminine principles of embodiment to allow us to be sensorially awakened and really, really available to life, and to really shift the story that we're living out through our individual lives, but the story of humanity about what's possible, what we're here to do, who we are, and how we can do that in community. I'm really interested in gathering conscious communities and creating that, and the wellspring of just wisdom that can come by living in conscious community.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of us are craving community at the moment.
Yeah, totally.
So,
yeah.
I'm really interested in the neurosculpting that you mentioned. Can you please share more about neurosculpting, and then we'll get into some of the other juicy things you were sharing?
Totally, yeah. Neurosculpting is an amazing process. It's created by Lisa Wimberger, and she has a crazy story herself about having had seizures and flatlining in front of her daughter, and recognizing, even though she had been a lifelong meditator, there was something else that she needed to do. And so she created this process called neurosculpting. And it's really about rewiring your brain so that you can have better access to the way you're living out the story that's happening at both the conscious and the subconscious level. And she's had amazing work working. It's just, it's really a very nuanced process of applying neuroplasticity to your life, and to working with learning how the brain works, and really working with your brain to support your life so that we can move out of survival. And I heard her on a podcast and was just blown away, and was like, I have to do this, and happened to be going to Denver for a conference and was able to meet her. And that just kind of kicked off my whole journey, which I've been on for quite a while now with the Institute, and, trained as a facilitator, and really was key in healing both part of my autoimmune issues that I was going through, and PTSD from a plane crash. So have real life experience in what can happen in rewiring those fight, flight, freeze responses in my own self. So I really believe in it in working with my clients and my students. Yeah.
Wow. So with the neurosculpting, because it sounds like in some ways she's using some of the same principles, at least, that Dr. Joe Dispenza uses with rewiring, with meditation, and just all the rewiring the nervous system, and working with subconscious beliefs and patterns and energy. And so can you explain a little bit, like the actual method of neurosculpting, what tools is Lisa using in her model? And yeah.
Yeah, so it's a 5-step process, but the big aspect of it is down regulating that limbic system and up regulating the prefrontal cortex. And what we understand about the brain is that limbic system is energy efficient, right? We can have no resourcing going on and we can survive. Our limbic system, it's the workhorse and it does so much for us. But so many of us are moving and living in that place where we're just stuck in these limbic loops, these biofeedback loops, where we are perpetuating illness, we're perpetuating suffering, we're perpetuating our victim status, whatever it is that we might be going through. And we're doing that at the conscious level and the unconscious level. But when we consciously bring in the aspect of upregulating the prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning self, this part of us that has access to gratitude and appreciation, all of these different aspects that, institutes like the Heart Math Institute has proven can actually really change the whole system and can change our physiology, can change our electromagnetic field. And so when we upregulate that prefrontal cortex, we have the opportunity to invite ourselves to tell ourselves a better story, right? And so we work with the neuroplasticity to rewire that story. So one of the basic neurosculpting meditations is called a release and fill. So how do you release that stress pattern? And we look at it somatically. So understanding, what is the texture, what's the tone, what's the color. So just like Dr. Joe, going into that feeling state aspect and giving that a metaphor or an image that you can work with, and then reinscribing that to be something that supports you better. So that's the basic aspects. And there's a lot of correlation between all of the work. And I think, a lot that we'll see when you just kind of arrive at wisdom, there's always these overlaps. Like different people put the modalities together differently. Mm-hmm. And I think that's fantastic because what it provides us is an opportunity for your personality to say, this modality works better for me. But what we're also can understand is that when it comes down to wisdom, we're working just simply with wisdom, right? And the modality doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But the piece about the limbic system was key for me a few years ago because Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, he touches on the limbic system. But when I started to dive deeper, because I wanted to know more, even though I've taken anatomy and physiology about 7 times in my life for different courses and trainings, nobody really talks about the importance of the limbic system. So could you dive deeper into how, so that people really understand, like as if you were to give them an owner's manual of their limbic system and how that's playing out. Are you able to help us just get a better understanding of how it works and why we stay stuck because of it?
Yeah, totally. And I'm no brain expert by any means, as much study as I've done, obviously like artist versus brain surgeon. But, I think one of the easiest ways to look at the brain is to think about it in kind of the 3 aspects. So kind of the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and the human brain. And our limbic system lives in that mammalian side of us. Right. So it lives in the middle part of our brain. And so it is part of our ancient survival system. It's part of the brain that keeps us going in our survival. It's an essential, very functioning part. There's also, if I were to take it more to the metaphysics, a deeper aspect around understanding the interface of the limbic system into our more multidimensional self, but I'll keep it as basic and functional right now. And just thinking about the limbic system as being kind of the storehouse of the subconscious. And that subconscious being like what we mean like muscle memory or just memory in general, implicit memory, right? And so we can think about that when we begin to store information into that limbic system, we began to reuse that over and over again. How do you know how to drive to the grocery store? Mm-hmm. How do you know how to drive, period? Right? There's a limbic aspect to that. It allows us to function without having to go put the key, like all the ways when we're learning, right? The limbic system is an efficient, effective way of living, right? But what can happen when our limbic system is stuck, let's, if you use the analogy of like having your finger on the doorbell, right? Like our limbic system could get stuck in a state where it's just on one story, right? Or that we keep going to that same door and hitting that doorbell over and over again. And so whatever cueing in our environment, inner or outer, that might have us hitting that same doorbell, right? Calling up that same story over and over again. So even though the external scenario might begin to shift, we're still living out through that same phasing of that story. We're still living out that same aspect. And that what happens is that translates at a chemical level, right? We think of things so much in the personality, but actually our personality is chemical, right? And so what happens in this limbic system is that a set of neurotransmitters are cascading through our body, and that chemistry creates our reality, our perception of that reality. We're living out that chemistry. And so if we want to begin to shift our limbic system, we have to shift those triggers. We might need to shift things in the environment, but deeper than that, we can begin to understand through the story aspect, through that personality aspect, what is the story that I'm living out? What's the story that I'm telling myself? What's being revealed to me about this scenario? And is this empowering me or disempowering me? Am I leaking and losing power, or am I feeling empowered by this? And most of the time, when it's those places in our limbic system where we're jamming on that doorbell and we're, locked into a story that's not serving us, we are, of course, leaking our power, and we're not being able to move from a really centered place. And we become reactionary to life. We become a victim to our circumstances. And we've lost the ability to really use that higher executive aspect of us in making choice, right? So what we know about the prefrontal cortex is that it's an energy hog. It takes a lot of resourcing to stay in our prefrontal cortex. We need to be rested. We need to be watered. We need to be well fed. We need good, healthy fats, right? We need joy. We need play. All of those aspects are really important to live from our higher executive self. And so what we have kind of perpetuated in our modern life, in our daily life, is to live in this stress state, right? And that's going to be our limbic system. And we can, know from brainwaves that we're probably bathing our brain then in very high beta at that point when we've activated these limbic aspects. And I just want to say, just in, again, in full disclosure, I'm not a brain science expert, and coming from this very specific lens, and that the limbic system is essential and works well and it's really important functioning as well. It's not all bad, but from the perspective that we're talking about in our survival personality, that's one of the things that our limbic system's doing. It's keeping us stuck in that survival personality, right? And then of course we're living that out over and over and over again in just so many scenarios.
Right. Yeah. And I liked what you said about, how much energy it takes to stay in the prefrontal cortex, and that, and then the things related to that are the very things that we're not doing because we're living these lives in the culture that we're living in. Can you talk a little bit more about how things like play and, rest, and how that actually supports us and helps us to rewire the brain?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you can't play or rest if you don't have safety, right? If there's not a feeling of safety in your system, we all know this from when we've had insomnia or we've been up at night. It actually is a really big sign to our system that we're okay. Right. And so when we can, even if it's just a little bit, if you get those bubbles out, you don't really feel like blowing them, but you just begin, and you invite yourself to recognize, I'm safe enough to blow bubbles right now. Like, I'm safe enough just to take a little gander around the yard. I'm safe enough to watch this cloud for 5 minutes. It begins to sort of give our system that's been on in this hypervigilance or this lockdown state, it just gives us a little taste that there might be something else that we could begin to root into, right? And rooting into rest and relaxation is essential if we want to be able to live in our bliss states, if we want to be able to stay in that kind of level of coherence that invites us to be supple, to invites us to live from a state of flow. We have to have this opportunity to experience play, to experience rest, to experience ecstasy and fun, and these aspects that are very childlike in a way, right? A lot of what I say is like, what's true adulting? It's returning to who you were at 2 and 3, right? For those of us who had that kind of childhood, and not everyone has had that opportunity, right? So it might be a whole new level of learning to come into this. But what we know is like, what happens when we're locked down is our fascia doesn't glide, right? So one of the aspects about play is like getting your fascia into gliding mode, like actually beginning to if you think about like riding a bike or roller skating, or that thing that has that kind of that glide aspect to it. We want our fascia to be able to glide, and it doesn't have that opportunity when we're locked down, right? And so that's why things like breath work can invite that, laughter, opening up those endorphins, getting things moving, getting the fascia to relax, begins to change our state of being. And again, we want to work this beyond our personality, right? We want to work this deeper than that personality level. And sometimes I just say to people, like, it doesn't matter that you feel like you don't want to do it or that you don't like it. You have to accept that this is the medicine that's needed. Laughter is the medicine that you need. Find something funny and watch it on TV and laugh. Go for a bike ride, get on your rollerblades, do something silly, roll down the hill, whatever it's going to take, just to invite you to shift that state of being, so that you begin to recognize, no matter what, I'm still alive. And if I am still alive, if I'm still breathing, I have the opportunity to change my state. And if I have the opportunity to change my state, I've got everything I need in my power to live my best life, regardless of the circumstances, of the external and what they might be presenting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because with the movement and the fascia and how important that is, for years I was doing a lot of yoga and body work, and I was doing a lot of things to work on that level. But having been in post-traumatic stress disorder since childhood, because that I didn't understand how that was hijacking my body, my energy, my consciousness, right?
Yeah.
There was always this frustration that I was doing all the right things to take care of myself, but every time I'd go back to my massage therapist, there'd still be that lump there, that just wouldn't shift, it just wouldn't move. Just this locked up muscle in my shoulder. Just really tight hamstrings, just like these chronic kinds of ways my body was holding those memories, that trauma, just that reality that, and the beliefs that, no, it's not safe. I'm not safe. The world's a hostile place. People suck, right? Like I had all those beliefs based on experience. And even though I was doing the work, kind of in the conscious realm of going to yoga, reading the books, reading the right books, right? It wasn't shifting for me until I found the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza and really started going in with the meditations, and bringing my conscious awareness to how much my thoughts were creating, the stuff that I didn't want, but it was just what was being created because of that unresolved stuff. So can you talk a little bit more about chronic stress, and then in particular, the post-traumatic stress? And I know that for the research that I've done, post-traumatic stress for something like an airplane crash when you're an adult is very different from from childhood.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But there's some correlations that we can just think about trauma in general as being, trauma is not the event. Trauma is our emotions and fears that are too much to process in a moment and get stuck. So trauma is really unexpressed emotion and fear. Okay. And so that can happen all at once, such as a plane crash. plummeting from the sky, or across time, such as in cases of neglect, not knowing how to meet our own needs, not having been taught that as children, actually having a childhood where that was the case, or, and also, large T traumas in our childhood where there were events that completely shift our perspective or create a schism in our safety system, right? And so what's important, and I just want to say it again, it's not the event. Trauma is not an event. Because if we stay at that level of event, then we are giving all of our power away to something we cannot control, right? And something that happened in the past, which means we have to live in the past with that event, right? And so the only thing that can unlock trauma is to come into the present and to deal with what's presenting in the body in the moment, okay? And so to release any type of trauma from ourselves, we have to create enough safety and resilience in our nervous system so that we can open up those places that haven't been expressed and find safe and held ways to express, to go all the way through what got stuck, what got stopped in the moment, right? And so to do that, it takes building up that safety system first. So if you want to look at releasing your trauma, you have to look at increasing your neuroresiliency so that you've got a foundation. So, I think of it like a little trampoline. You've got to have a trampoline underneath you that's going to catch you when you fall, that's going to give you a bounce back up, right? And too often we want to just bypass creating that neuroresiliency and just try and work on the story. And this is why we continuously re-traumatize ourselves, right? Because again, the event's not the issue, but not being able to go all the way through that experience, being able to express safely, being able to have, it takes an immense amount of safety to feel those feelings of unsafeness and know that you're going to be okay. That's really tough. And so one of the reasons so many people feel, and why it's so common across so many different aspects of our modern world, is that we just can't heal from your traumas. Like, it's just, I'm a victim and I have to hold that state of victimhood. I have to hold this identity. I've got to try to trout that out as who I am was this experience that I had, especially if it happens in early childhood. This is what has made me who I am.
Yeah.
And I think that work, such as Dr. Joe is presenting, one of the reasons it works, like I know that there's the science behind the meditations and all that's fantastic, but I actually think the real reason why it works is because it requires you to begin to step up and take self-responsibility for your experience, for your feeling state, for your thought state, for how you're approaching your life. And the moment you get someone to begin to step into their power that way, they begin to get scrappy for themselves. And that neuroresiliency will begin to build from that place. The moment you're willing to claim this life as yours, including the ups, including the downs and the sideways and every other part, you begin to have the energy, the actual voltage in your system, in your body, that allows you to begin to create a neuroresilient tapestry that can support you to meet whatever has happened in your past and whatever will come in your future. And when we do this from the perspective of not keeping ourselves out of life, right? Because how many of us began the spiritual journey or our consciousness journey to be like, this way, I will never have another dark night of the soul. I will be able to handle all of the stuff. And, we think it's going to kind of create this flat line of like, where we're just like stoic, and we're just like life, whatever. But actually what it does is it makes us much more vibrantly alive. It makes us actually much more dynamic in our emotional range, right? We actually can fully actually grieve and understand grief is not something to be getting over. It's a human experience. It's an honor to have that level of love in my system that I can grieve. That's glorious. That's massively human. I don't want to get rid of that, right? Nor do I want to get rid of the opportunity to have bliss states and ecstasy and just these waves of joy and just beauty and awe rolling through my body. Yeah. Right. And so what we want a system that can balance both of those types of experiences, not rating them hierarchically, but allowing life to happen through us. Right. And then when we can say soft and supple to life happening through us, when we don't have to lock down on something, then we've got the kind of neuroresiliency that allows us to heal from anything. And so, when we're looking at post-traumatic stress, The post part is that the trauma happened in the past, right? But it's post, and yet it's present, right? And we're living it out over and over and over again, and for some of us, especially if you have a childhood, what you'll notice about the post-traumatic is that it's across the board. It's a low-grade hum in every aspect of life, which might be different than if you had an experience such as what I had in a plane crash that was very isolated. And so my stress response wouldn't necessarily get triggered across the board, but it would get triggered specifically. So that can kind of be the difference between the age range that you experience the trauma, is that it can either create this identity that's low grade across every aspect of your life, or it becomes more focused and gets kind of triggered specifically. So I would be fine until I got on a plane, and then I would literally lose my mind and just literally lose my mind. So, I think that, and again, we don't need to have a hierarchy of trauma, like one's not better than the other, or worse, I guess, the way. So one's not worse than the other. But the question is, how free are you to be yourself? And I think that whether we have had big events in our life, modern day life, our enculturation, our domestication, the stresses that we live under as modern day people, we're not free to be who we really are. And so one of the most radical acts we can ever do is to step into that level of self-empowerment, create a nervous system that's available to actually be here, present in life, and love ourselves, like actually fully fall madly and deeply crazy in love with our crazy self, not that idealized version where we've got it all fixed together. No. The literal craziness that is you, falling in love with that person and having deep compassion for what they're going through and how they're navigating, all of these crazy moments without a user's guide. We don't arrive here on earth with like a little user manual that gives us the steps to put our IKEA furniture together, anything like that. And I think we're doing a really good job, pulling these threads together. Those people who are having this consciousness journey, who are awakening and saying, let me try this. Well, let me try a little bit of this meditation. Let me try, and just keep pulling those threads together until you find you're the one that unlocks you, right? And just be willing to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because on my journey, yoga was the one tool that I used for many, many years to deal with, the physical issues, the back pain, and I always felt really great after, yoga class, but it was always so frustrating for me that the minute a trigger would happen, like I literally could walk down the steps out of the yoga studio and get to the street and something would happen that would just set me off. And one of the things that I did back then was I would look at the other, I was always comparing, which is, I think part of that state of being, in the limbic system. I think it goes hand in hand with a lot of the trauma, and, it's like you're looking outside yourself when you're traumatized, right? But I was always comparing myself to other people who were on the spiritual journey, and then sort of beating myself up that, I wasn't as far along as they were, that I wasn't able to tap into joy the way they could, so in some ways that had been such a disservice to myself. But at the same time, I know for many of us, being in any kind of spiritual community or taking a class in, a modality or a meditation or something that you're doing to help yourself, right? To help yourself heal or become more aware, sometimes that piece becomes another layer that we, bludgeon ourselves with.
Absolutely.
So the self-love for me was key. Can you talk a little bit about either how in neurosculpting or some of the other things that you've studied, what unlocked the self-love piece for you?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't a modality for me. It definitely, the self-love piece, I would say, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I would have sworn to you that I could have passed a lie detector test and I loved myself, right? I would have sworn, and it's interesting. So since that time, I've interviewed hundreds of women. And one of the questions I ask them is like, well, do you love yourself? And most of them will say to me, yes. Tell me how you're talking to yourself. Oh, I call myself this name. Well, tell me about how you support yourself. Oh, I have to yell at myself. I'm really mean to myself, right? So I think that one of the things is like we're really confused about actually what self-love is, and that we're unwilling sometimes to actually get real and raw. And my unwillingness was unconscious. Like I didn't know that I was completely full of crap, that I loved myself, right? What I could do for myself was I could motivate the crap out of myself. I was super ambitious. I was a real big go-getter and I had confidence, and I confused confidence with self-love. And I think some people who don't have confidence confuse confidence with self-love too. And they think, oh, I'm not confident, so I must not love myself. And I think that, they're not the same whatsoever. I was a performer. I could get up on stage. I didn't have any problem talking to people, going after my dreams. I had tons of confidence, but I didn't have self-love, because for me, what self-love is it's knowing your inner light. It's knowing yourself at the sacred level. And it's having a connection, a communion with your soul, and really being just encircled in your own energy and your own light and your own love, and really knowing yourself from that level and from that depth of what I call your big S self, right? So our small S self is our ego, it's our personality, it's the one out there, but there's this big S self that is truly what we're here to express, and truly what is meant to be inhabiting and enlivening this physical form. And yet we've lost all of our initiations and culturally around this. We've lost our connection to really understanding how to empower ourselves to be that full sacred soul that we actually are, who created this body so that she could go on this journey of evolution. And so for me, what self-love is it has nothing to do with my personality. It has nothing to do with self-help. It has nothing to do with even self-care, though all of those aspects will grow out from that place, right? But for me, what coming and falling in love madly and deeply with myself is it's stripping myself down bare. And it's being willing to sit in the depths of who I am and to change my mind about my worthiness, to not see myself as less than, to not need to punish myself, to not even need to fix those parts I don't like, right? There's parts of my personality I don't particularly like, right? I can be annoying, I can be forgetful, I can, all of those things, right? But if my self-love was predicated upon fixing those aspects of my personality, which are really, in the largest scheme of life and my journey, unimportant. But me being connected to the true light and the life force that is me, that's essential, right? So for me, there was no modality that gave me that. It was just this absolute willingness to continue to go deeper and deeper and deeper until I found my own core. And that's the process that I hold people in, is to be able to embody your soul essence so that you can have that level of love. That it's not a concept of love. It's an actual visceral electric feeling that vibrates in yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love the way you explain that. Yeah, because for me, with the self-love thing, I remember reading books by, in the late 80s, early 90s, reading books by Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra and, a bunch of, like Denise Lin, all the people who were sort of the spiritual teachers of that time. And this is before the internet. And, I had a little spiritual bookstore on the Upper West Side that I'd pop into and buy a book a week. And, and they all talked about how important self-love was, but it was just a concept to me. It was so abstract. And even though I was doing so much inner work, it wasn't until many, many years later when I was doing inner child work, the internal family systems. And when I started to integrate those parts and actually talk to that 3-year-old self, right? And realizing, like, not just the 3-year-old self, but all those selves at the different ages, like that, especially my 3-year-old self was this brilliant, like loving, beautiful, generous, like she has so much wisdom to offer. She was telling me things that were just that blew my mind. And it was in that moment, like in that session, when I integrated that self and just listened to her, it was like, wow, boom, life has not been the same since. And that self-love piece for me, it wasn't something I could try to grasp or learn from a book or try to do in therapy. It happened organically from integrating, releasing pain, integrating the lost part that I hadn't talked to, that I kept ignoring. So it was very interesting for me, that self-love piece and what it took to get there, because it really was like, once it clicked for me, it changes the way you show up for yourself in the world.
It
changes all your relationships.
Yeah.
It actually changes how your level of safety. I mean, like all those issues of post-traumatic stress disorder, it's like a lot of those just softened and released because of like the self-love being this balm, it just like softened all that. So it's just incredible when we rewire ourselves with self-love, when we rewire ourselves with just love and joy, by tapping into it, because it's in us. It's just been covered over.
Absolutely. It is the truth of who we are, right? And, I just encourage people, if love, especially if your human experience of love has not been one that's been safe, change that word, right? Find the word that works for you. Self-acceptance, self-compassion, whatever it's going to take to dig in deeper. Because what we're talking about in terms of coming into that integration that you bring up, Sheila, is actually coming to having your vibrational signature be the truth of who you are, rather than be, if you think about like a car battery, like when it gets that like crusty corroded parts on it, right? Like that's all of our bull. I don't know if we're allowed to cuss, but that's all of our
totally
poop. all the shit that we've just been collecting. That's all the crap that we're telling ourselves about ourselves. That's all of the aspect. And one of the things that's so important when you get that shift, when you clean all that corrosion off, and your battery can spark really light, like quickly spark on, right? And you just wake up into yourself each day. You go to sleep inside yourself each night, right? And you just got this ability to have that kind of connection with the truth of who you are. Well, what happens is that those circumstances that may have, they may still be happening, or you recall that thing from the past, it's not that event again shifted, right? But that your entire perspective of it is very different, right? And your entire aspect of being able to glean wisdom from it, or also just to release it, as in, I'm not going to make that mean anything about me. I choose to let that go. That has no context from this level of beingness. From who I'm being right now, that event has no context to me. And I think that from not being in that place of self-love, that can seem impossible. And it can seem like what I'm saying might be even a bypass, but it's really not when you're actually fully through that level of integration, where you've brought these parts of yourself that have been dismembered, that have been negated, that have been, cut off from your conscious reasoning self, when they come back into wholeness and you're humming in your own rhythm. It's just amazing to be able to have this ability to not get derailed by the external, right? And by the events or by the memories, just to be able to see it, just like it's, it's just it's another passing ship in the night, and you're like, okay, hey, there goes that ship again. Yeah. No biggie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting when you tap into that truth of, that you're whole, right? That there's some part of you that has never been, that was always okay. It's sort of like what I call like that internal light, that no matter what happened, in your life, traumas and events and things, there's a part of you that was always truly like untouched by that and remained whole no matter what those experiences created for you in terms of beliefs and perceptions and your sense of reality. And when you start tapping into that, it opens you up to the possibilities. Right. For me, what I found was once I started to tap into the power of that and that I am this powerful human being, and that's actually the truth. And the rest of what happened is just, like as you let that go, it's like, wow, so actually I could have that thing that I always thought I wasn't allowed to have. And I can create something cool in a business, and I can have, I can travel the world if I feel like traveling the world, like all those things that, that younger self that was feeling so identified with, that like I grew up with these unfortunate circumstances, and so therefore I will never have what those lucky people have, right?
Yes.
But it's just so fascinating that once you start tapping into that wholeness, the self-love, and you start unwiring, the stuff that keeps you stuck there, possibilities just open up. So
absolutely. And if we think about it, that any belief system we have collapses a wave, right? So every belief we have is narrowing our field over and over and over and over again. And so many of these inherited beliefs that we have, these enculturated and conditioned beliefs, if we don't take the time to examine them, we might not understand why we can't create, why we don't even have the energy to create that thing that we've been dreaming of, or why we feel like that's for everybody else, but not for us. When the truth is, if it's for one, it's for all. There's only one of us here. We're all doing this thing. If it's available to one consciousness, it's available to be experienced by the consciousness in this body as well. So what is it then that's keeping me from accessing those things? And again, I think there's a way we can use this knowledge to sort of do crappy law of attraction, which is like, I want to get stuff. Mm-hmm. I want to, gather more stuff. And I mean, I guess it works that way as well. I'm not interested in that so much as understanding that every time we examine those beliefs and we choose belief systems that support us, that even if what we're doing is collapsing a wave, we're making the choice to collapse the wave we want to be riding, right? So we're making the choice to say, I'm going to surf this wave, and I'm going to surf this wave and see where it takes me. So then I can jump to the next wave and jump to the next wave, right? And we begin to accelerate our conscious awakening in this way by examining these, what's in our subconscious basement and saying, not so much that. No, not carrying that one forward. I'm going to rewire that belief. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to wire something in that really serves me and supports me, right? And so one of the reasons, people ask me all the time, well, how do I work with my subconscious? Well, the first of all is, get a good teacher or, a facilitator who can work with you. But when you're working by yourself, look at your behavior. Your personality is exposing to you your beliefs. right? The fruits of your life are exposing to you what you believe. Not what your conscious cognitive reasoning mind is saying. Oh, I believe that I can have all the money in the world. I believe I'm abundant, right? And you look around and you're living in scarcity, and you're living in survival, and you're living in stuckness, right? And it's like, don't argue with yourself, just accept you actually believe in scarcity. And you recognize that from your personality, you recognize that from the situations you're creating and you're going through. And rather than sitting in the blame and shame of that, just say, this belief no longer serves me. I'm going to do the deeper work, rather than just staying, so much of mindset or affirmation work stays right at that top of that iceberg, and just it stays at the place where we think we're in control. Mm-hmm. And if you really want to be dealing with your consciousness, if you really want to be on the journey of evolving your consciousness, you're going to have to work at the subconscious and unconscious levels, because our body is a small portion of our whole system, and our cognitive reasoning brain is a small part of our whole mind, right? And so we can't just work in these small portions and expect to have full access. We're going to have to work in the subtle realms if we want to have our unlimited self available in our waking, whatever this version of waking is, in this waking world, in this waking life. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So what other tools, in addition to the neurosculpting, are you using for your own life and with clients?
Totally. So yeah, I use the conscious engineering from Dr. Joe Dispenza, to really go in and create that future event and do that. One of the concepts that I live out the most is Greg Braden's concept of the living prayer. So the feeling state being my offering to life, and really curating that, and creating the vibrational aspect. I work a lot with energy, so getting those, working with the polar fields and getting the right voltage into the body, so we actually have enough energy working through it. And I do a lot of channeling of divine feminine codes, and bringing in that level of new paradigm light, so that we can be shifting systems and structures here. Yeah. And so I work intuitively in a lot of those kind of more subtle realms.
Great.
To do that. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I think I want
and I love breath work as like how do we anchor in every day to our nervous system? For me, it's breath work.
Okay. Can you talk about what kind of breath work you're doing?
I do lots of kinds of breath work, but in terms of like a breath work circle or like a breath work process, I would probably use what I don't know what Dr. Joe calls it. I call it the Shakti breath. So where we're going to squeeze the bandhas all the way up. We're going to hold the breath. We're going to be spiking the crystalline structure in the brain. And I use an active pranayama, which is a 3-part breath, all done through the mouth. And you breathe in 1 breath to the belly, 2nd breath to the chest, exhale. And it is a breath that will firstly trigger all the things in your sympathetic nervous system that you've been running from. And so a lot of people have to really ease into that breath, because you're going to have a lot more sensation. So many of us are numb, our fascia, our nerve endings, our emotional body is just so asleep and so deadened. And so this breath really takes you on that journey of opening up, so you can actually facilitate more life force and more light into the body. And then, I work so much with rhythmic breath. So finding just a pacing, and usually doing this with drumming, so that we're actually, so again, a lot of what's going on with a lot of us is we're running really low voltage, really low vibration. And so our rhythms are off, our actual inner rhythm is off. And so actually breathing rhythmically can begin to get that rhythm kind of pulsing again, begin to feel more life force ebbing and flowing inside of you with that. So those are kind of, I would say, the 3 kind of big staples that are in my breath house toolbox. But I love the breath. And, my autoimmune was around asthma and breathing. So breath is my medicine so much, because it was the thing that I had to learn to finally let support me. So, so that I could get back into, living in this body. Yeah.
I love that. I love that you took the lesson from what was happening, and then it became an integral part of your work and your practice. Yeah, that's fabulous. I think that we do unfortunately have to wrap it up. This has been so fabulous. So, Elisha, can you let people know where they can find you, and then anything else that you want to add before you go?
Totally. So you can find me on the web, elishahalpin.com. And I hang out on Instagram and I hang out on the Insight Timer app. I'm teaching on Insight Timer Live a lot. So you can find me on there if you like the app. And what is there anything I want to say? It's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? What I would just say is that if you're watching this, you're here for it. You're here for your evolution. You're here for your awakening consciousness, and just give yourself the space and the support to do it. Just let go of any and every story and just anything in the external that seems to be pulling you out of your own center, and just trust your soul and just keep coming back to this heart space. Yeah. I'm just reminded, just really quick, when you said about the finding that inner light in the heart that hasn't been, sort of tampered with no matter what we've gone. It just reminded me that, anahata means unstruck, right? So our heart can't be struck. And so even though sometimes it has to be broken open so we can get to that light, like that is just the journey to arriving back home. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Elisha. Yeah. I'm
thanks for having me.
What a great conversation. I'm so glad you made time to join us. And I hope to be hearing lots more from you. There were so many things we didn't even get to touch on.
I know.
So we'll have to circle back in another conversation. So everyone, thank you for being here with us today. And if you got any beautiful insights from this talk today, please share them in the Facebook group, and share the Energy and Consciousness Summit with your friends and family. And just, it happens with community. And when more of us support each other in the work of evolving ourselves, the more play and the more joy it brings to everyone. So thanks for being here today. And we have more great conversations coming. So take care, everyone, and see you in the next video.